Welcome to Spooky Times with Eric D. I am your Eric D. Now, this episode is all about, you might have heard an urban legend that if you watch a certain scene in The Exorcist, you can see a real-life serial killer. And that's what this show is all about. We're going to talk about that urban legend, and we're going to talk about that scene, and we're going to talk about that alleged murderer. But before we do, I want to remind you to check out the show's website. That is spookyas.com. And you can listen to almost each and every episode there. You can also find links to our social media. We are at SpookyAssShit on Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/SpookyTimes with Eric D. While you're there, you can join our secret closed group, the Spookaroos. That's a separate thing. You got to look for that to join that separately. You do have to ask permission to join, but as long as you look like a real person with a real profile and you're not a spam bot or something like that, we'll let you in. And then as long as you don't, post anything too weird, we let you stay in. So that's how that works. So go ahead and join that, the Spookaroos. And we are quickly approaching our 200th episode. So at the end of the show tonight, I'm going to remind you how you can be a part of episode 199 as we look back and kind of explore and celebrate some of the moments that we have shared together over these past 5 years. Yeah, it's 5 years now. So be sure to listen all the way to the end of the episode to get that information. Okay, so that urban legend I was telling you about, the deal is if you watch The Exorcist, it's a terrifying movie, of course. Some people say it's tame by today's standards, but I have to call BS on that because this is a movie that features a scene of a possessed little girl stabbing herself in the vagina with a crucifix and yelling, "Let Jesus fuck you," as she does it. And then when her mother comes in and is horrified by this scene, she pulls her mother's head into her crotch and tells her to lick it. Does that seem tame? Is that tame to you? You sickos? No, I don't think so. I think it's still a very effective movie and a pretty scary movie. And I'm not someone who gets scared by movies. But even I, the first time I saw The Exorcist, I think the only two movies that actually scared me when I saw them were The Exorcist and the original Halloween. Those might be the only two. And American Werewolf in London. I guess that one did in a way too. So those were my actual scary movies that I've seen in my life. Anyway, one of the scariest scenes in The Exorcist is a scene that isn't really based on the, paranormal horror that is supposed to be going on in the movie. It is a scene where Regan is brought to the hospital so that they can conduct medical tests on her to try to get to the root of what is causing her strange behavior, because they think, maybe there's some kind of blockage going on in her brain or some kind of aneurysm or maybe just something funky going on. So they run all sorts of tests like MRIs and all kinds of things. And you see her in the hospital, and that is just as freaky as some of the things that we see later in the movie. Crucifix scene aside, I think that one tops them all. But it could tie the spider crawl scene if you've seen the version you've never seen before, as they called the re-release when it came out, or the head spinning or that kind of thing. Lots of spoilers, by the way, for The Exorcist, but you've had time to see it, and if you haven't seen that movie by now, that's probably like 99% of you probably have seen it. For the 1% who haven't, what are you waiting for? Go ahead, put it on. You don't need to have seen the movie to enjoy this episode, but I mean, you do need to have seen the movie. It's an excellent movie. Probably my favorite horror movie. But adding to the horrors of this hospital scene is the urban legend that one of the nurses in the scene is actually a real-life serial killer. And it turns out that is only possibly true if you're taking that statement literally. But it's more true than not. So let's get into it. Let's learn about a man named Paul Bateson and how he ended up in The Exorcist and how he ended up in prison for murder. Paul Bateson was born on August 24th, 1940, and he grew up in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. He claimed that his father used to punish him as a child by making him stay home from Saturday matinees at the local movie theater and forcing him to listen to opera on the radio instead. By the early 1960s, he joined the army and was stationed in Germany. It was at this time, Bateson claims, that he began drinking heavily out of boredom, beginning a lifelong struggle with alcoholism. After being discharged from the army, he returned to Lansdale, but in 1964, he moved to New York City, where he began a relationship with a man. This was his first gay relationship, but Bateson would later state that he was actually bisexual. Bateson and his lover both enjoyed heavy drinking, either at local watering holes in New York City or the frequent parties the couples would have at their home, as well as on weekend getaways at Fire Island. They were known to be good time guys. 5 years later, Bateson's mother died of a stroke, and his younger brother tragically committed suicide. Bateson trained as a neurological radiological technician and began working in that field. His long-term romantic relationship ended in 1973, and he moved to Brooklyn and started a new job at New York University Medical Center, where he was well-liked and respected by his colleagues and the patients he interacted with. In late 1972, film director William Friedkin visited NYUMC while he was preparing to make the movie The Exorcist. He wanted to view some actual medical procedures, since he was considering showing some of them in his film. He was also looking for staff who might be willing to be extras in the film, since they would be shooting the interiors in New York City. The supervisor, Dr. Burton Lane, invited the director to watch a cerebral angiography. At the time, these type of angiographies were performed by puncturing the patient's carotid artery, located in the front of the neck, in order to insert a catheter through which a contrast agent was injected in order to make the patient's blood vessels more visible under X-rays. In the moments between the arterial puncture and the insertion of the catheter, blood freely issued from the neck in rhythm with the patient's heartbeat. Friedkin was so impressed that he told Lane immediately afterwards that not only did he want to depict the procedure in the film, he wanted Lane to be the one performing it on camera, along with the nurse and the technician who were working that night, and this happened to be Paul Bateson. A few months later, Friedkin and his crew returned to NYUMC to shoot the scene, blocking off part of the hospital's radiology department for 2 successive weekends. In the scene, the character of Reagan, played by my frenemy, Linda Blair, is examined medically to see if any of her strange behaviors can be scientifically explained. Of course, later in the film it becomes clear that her problems are not medical in nature. In the scene, it is Bateson who speaks most of the dialogue, demonstrating his calm bedside manner while speaking to Reagan. This was an attribute that Bateson was well respected for in real life by his colleagues, and they would note that he had used this exact same manner with many of his actual child patients. He can be seen in the background early as Reagan is wheeled into the room, helping put her on the table and attaching wires to her shoulders. As the film shows Reagan's face in tight close-up, alternating with takes of the procedure being finished, including her blood spurting into the air and staining her surgical gown, just as what had happened in the actual procedure that Friedkin watched, Bateson's voice is heard off-camera, instructing her, warning her that the puncture will hurt, and reassuring her as she winces immediately afterwards. Upon The Exorcist's release at the end of 1973, Bateson's scene became notorious as one that audiences found very disturbing, despite its lack of any supernatural content that underlies the rest of the film's horror elements. Medical professionals also praised it as a realistic depiction of the procedure, though it may comfort you to know that they no longer use the puncture your carotid artery method to perform such angiographies. Around the time The Exorcist was released at the end of '73, Bateson's drinking began to increase again, and this time it was adversely affecting his social life. In 1975, it affected his job performance so much that he was fired by NYUMC. "Nobody likes a drunk," he later told the Village Voice. Bateson sustained himself with odd jobs, such as doing light repair work and cleaning in apartments near his new home in Greenwich Village. He also worked taking tickets at a porno theater. He began to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and was successful for a time in staying sober. He socialized with other recovering alcoholic gay men and was hoping to start another long-term relationship. Despite his progress, however, by 1977, Bateson had begun drinking more heavily yet again. He later said that he was drinking at least a quart of vodka a day, which made him passive and curtailed his social life yet again. "After a few shots, I'd shave and get dressed," he'd said, intending to go out, but after the vodka, I had no energy left to move. On the nights when he was able to go out, Bateson patronized leather bars, something he had started doing back in 1970 with a group that styled themselves as bikers. "Leather impresses me," he said later, contrasting it with what he called drag and swish. Drag, of course, is, drag performers. Swish would be like an effeminate gay man. That would be like a derogatory term in the 70s for an effeminate gay man, possibly still to this day. And Bateson said about drag and swish, he said, "They give gays a bad name, like any extreme group would." On September 14th, 1977, Addison Verrell, a reporter who covered the film industry for Variety, was found dead in his Horatio Street apartment. He had been beaten and stabbed. There were some signs of a struggle. However, nothing of value had been taken. Police believe that if the killer's motive had been robbery, he might have been looking for cash or jewelry, since those could be taken quickly. There was no evidence of forced entry. Verrell had likely let his killer into the apartment. There were empty beer cans and half-full liquor glasses at the scene. Gay activist and journalist Arthur Bell, a friend of Verrell's, wrote an article about the case in The Village Voice, setting it against the larger issue of how murders of gay men, several of which occurred yearly in the village, were rarely taken seriously by police or reported on in the media, since they were seen as the result of sexual encounters gone wrong. The police, Bell wrote, had learned that Verrell had been at the Mine Shaft, a popular leather bar, until 6 a.m., after talking to many of the patrons. According to Bell, Verrell's friends said that while he did not seek the leather kink that was abundant at the Mine Shaft, he did like the attitudes of many of its customers. He was considered a regular, holding court at a corner table, not only at the Mine Shaft, but at other popular gay bars of the era. Verrell was well known and well loved in the community. Bell ended his Village Voice article by giving the phone number of the New York Police Department's Homicide Bureau and asking for anyone with information to call them. However, 8 days after the killing, someone called Bell, claiming to be the killer. During the call, it became apparent that the caller took offense to Bell's assumption that the killer was a psychopath who targeted gays. "I like your story and I like your writing," the caller told him, "but I'm not a psychopath." In a story that ran on The Voice's front page, the caller recounted the events of the night that ended in Verrell's murder. "I'm gay and I needed money and I'm an alcoholic," he said. After 3 months of sobriety, he claimed, he had gone out to the bar Badlands in the early hours of September 14th, where Verrell, whom he did not know, offered to buy him a beer, which he accepted. One beer became several, and the two men began consuming poppers and cocaine in addition to the drinks. At 3 a.m., they left Badlands and went to the Mine Shaft, where they continued their alcohol and drug consumption. The caller told Bell that he was impressed by how popular his companion was. "I didn't realize he was such a superstar, and I wanted to go home with him." At first, the caller said, Verrell demurred, saying that he had to get up early in the morning, but eventually the two men took a taxi to Verrell's apartment. There, the two men had more alcohol and cocaine, followed by sex. By now, it was 7:30 a.m. The caller said that he realized that Verrell was only looking to have a one-night stand and would not be interested in a long-term relationship.
I needed money, and I hated rejection.
So, still intoxicated,
I decided to do something I've never done before.
the caller said he retrieved a frying pan from the kitchen and beat Verrell with it until he was incapacitated. He then stabbed the journalist in the chest with a knife. After the killing, the caller said, he stole $57 in cash that Verrell had on him, plus his MasterCard, his passport, and some of his clothing. He used the money to buy liquor and, consequently, was drunk for the entire next day. The caller seemed to want to impress upon Bell that he was not a psychopath, but actually a rather sensitive and erudite gentleman. The caller claimed to be the son of an orchestra leader. He also said that he had a wife and a teenage son in Berlin who did not understand his homosexuality, which is why he was in New York. He had an interest in the arts, and he wanted to be a dancer when he was younger. Bell noted that the caller talked about wanting to atone for the crime several times, which Bell connected to the conversation taking place on Yom Kippur, the Jewish holiday of atonement.
But I don't want to give myself up. I wouldn't be able to practice again. I'd lose my license.
He declined to tell Bell what sort of practice the license was for, suggesting that it would help identify him too easily. When Bell contacted police about the call, they told him that it seemed like a solid lead in the case. The caller had known about the stolen credit card, a detail the police had not made public, and described a white substance found on the floor of Verrell's apartment as Crisco, a shortening frequently used by gay men at the time as a sexual lubricant. Police had not thus far been able to identify it, and also had not made that information public. Detectives suspected that the caller would call Bell again, and went to his apartment to wait for a call with him. At 11 p.m., his phone rang. But it was not the original caller. It was a man who identified himself as Mitch. Mitch told Bell that the killer was a man named Paul Bateson, whom he had gotten to know while the two were in rehab together a few months earlier. Mitch said that Bateson was an unemployed X-ray technician, and that he had called him earlier and confessed to the crime. Mitch asked to meet Bell in person, but the police told Bell not to do it. Instead, police went to Bateson's apartment, where they found him in a drunken stupor. When detectives asked Bateson if he knew why they were there, Bateson pointed to an open copy of the Village Voice with Bell's article and indicated that that was probably why. Bateson eventually gave the police a handwritten confession that was consistent with what the caller had told Bell. Bateson was charged with second-degree murder and detained while awaiting trial. Bell interviewed Bateson in prison a month later, visiting him at Rikers Island. Bateson talked generally about his life. Jail, he said, was helping him to get sober. His biggest regret about being in custody was missing the new season of the Joffrey Ballet, which at the time was based out of New York City. While Bateson avoided talking about the crime he was charged with, he did talk about the trial. He had pled not guilty and expected that to be the verdict after a long trial. A lot of people will be hurt, parents, friends. Then I'll tear up my roots and settle somewhere else. At the time of Bateson's arrest, police had also been investigating a series of murders of gay men over the previous 2 years, which they believed were committed by the same person due to similarities in the killer's modus operandi. 6 corpses of men had been found, dismembered, in bags floating in the Hudson River. None of them have ever been identified, but police traced clothes on some of the men to shops in Greenwich Village that catered to the gay community. Since the bags reportedly had wording on them corresponding to NYUMC's neuropsychiatric unit, and the dismemberment of the bodies appeared to have been done by someone skilled in using a knife, investigators began to suggest publicly that Bateson might be a suspect in what became known as the bag murders as well. Exorcist director William Friedkin remembered Bateson from both his initial visit to NYUMC and the filming of the angiography for The Exorcist. He had considered Bateson a nice young man who stood out due to the earring and studded bracelet he wore, neither of which were common accessories for men at the time. Surprised that the gentle-seeming Bateson he recalled could have been accused of a murder, Friedkin visited Bateson at Rikers. Friedkin said Bateson admitted to killing Verrell. Bateson said that the prosecutors were offering him a deal whereby if he confessed to the bag murders and some other unsolved killings, he would receive a shortened sentence. He told Friedkin that he was not sure if he would accept the deal. More recently, Friedkin has altered the story somewhat and now says that Bateson also confessed to being responsible for the bag murders, but this is all unverified. As a result of his conversation with Bateson, Friedkin decided that it was time to make the film adaptation of Gerald Walker's 1970 novel, Cruising, about a police officer going undercover in the gay community to catch a serial killer. Police did actually try this technique to catch the bag killer, with an undercover officer playing the role of a gay man looking for casual sex in leather bars. Apparently, it failed to catch the killer, but it did add even more cachet to Friedkin's movie proposal. Friedkin released Cruising, starring Al Pacino, in 1980.
What he discovers will change his life forever. Al Pacino.
Who's here? I'm here. You're here.
Cruising.
The film was protested by gay activists, spurred on by Bell himself, both during the filming of the movie in New York City and at the film's premiere. In fact, while they were filming the movie, the protests were so loud that a lot of the dialogue in the movie had to be done through ADR because the actual on-location dialogue had been shouted over, or, horns blaring and that kind of thing. And this, of course, was because they were saying that this movie would cause basically a type of gay panic and lead people to think that gay people were murderers and that, this would bring violence to the community and bring a bad name to homosexuality. And these protests, like I said, happened while they were filming, but also after the film's premiere. Star Al Pacino said that he understood the protest, but insisted that upon reading the screenplay, he never at any point felt that the film was anti-gay. He said that leather bars were just a fragment of the gay community, the same way the mafia is a fragment of the Italian-American life, referring to The Godfather, and that he would never want to do anything to harm the gay community. Critical reaction to the film was highly negative when it was first released, and audiences gave it mixed reviews at best. Meanwhile, Bateson had made several pre-trial motions, including asking that his confession be suppressed on the grounds that he had been drunk when he gave it and that the detectives had not read him his rights. He also denied having made the phone call to Bell, claiming that his drunken confession was just based on what he had read about the case in the Village Voice. His motions were denied. Bateson went on trial in early 1979. The state entered both his confession and Bell's Voice article into evidence against him. Contrary to his earlier prediction of a long trial and a not guilty verdict, Bateson was found guilty after just 4 days of trial. At Bateson's sentencing a month later, prosecutor William Hoyt called him a psychopath and reiterated his belief that he was responsible for the 6 unsolved bag murders. While Hoyt admitted that there was no direct proof of this, he said that Bateson had confessed to those crimes in a conversation with Richard Ryan, a friend who had testified for the state at the trial that Bateson had confessed to the Verrell murder. Speaking for himself, Bateson denied his role in any of these murders. Justice Morris Goldman sentenced Bateson to 20 years to life in prison. He ultimately found the connection of the other murders, the bag murders, too ephemeral to merit any consideration in sentencing Bateson for the murder of Verrell. Bateson ultimately served 24 years and 3 months of his sentence, becoming eligible for parole in 1997. On the day after his 63rd birthday, in August of 2003, he was released from prison. He completed his parole term in November of 2008, and that was the last public record of Paul Bateson available as of 2021. His whereabouts are unknown, but he's most likely dead. A record from the Social Security Death Index shows that a Paul F. Bateson with the same birth date and Social Security number issued in Pennsylvania died on September 15th, 2012. And that is the story of Paul Bateson. So the question remains, is there a serial killer in The Exorcist? And unfortunately, it's one that we can't officially answer. We can say that the man that is seen in The Exorcist is a convicted murderer, but we can't say for sure whether or not he was a serial killer. I would say that there really is no proof pointing to him, but one thing I do find suspicious, if you go back, assuming that he is the gentleman that made the phone call to Bell, the gentleman in the phone call, at one point, he says something very weird. He says, I decided to do something I've never done before. And that just seems like an odd phrase to throw in It just seems like, why would you say that? Like, why would you say, I've never done this before? And I think that maybe it's because he's, trying to point out that he's not a psycho. And so like, hey, it's not like I do this all the time. But to me, that seems like, he doth protest too much. And maybe like he was kind of like pre-covering himself, and saying like, hey, like, I did it this one time. It was like a crazy thing that happened, but it's not like I go out every weekend and try to do this. So that is a little suspicious to me, but even that I would not say is enough to convict the man on. So I think that question is still unknown, but definitely it seems like he was most likely guilty of the murder of Mr. Verrell, and you can see him in The Exorcist. So there is a little bit of truth to that rumor. Okay, so this is the end of the show now. I told you we are getting ready for our 200th episode, and you can be a part of the celebration. The big celebration is going to be in episode 199. That's where we are going to take a little look back before we move forward. We're going to talk about some past episodes, and I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear what some of your favorite episodes are, what your favorite moments are, who your favorite guests have been. So if you join the Spookaroos on Facebook, or if you send me a message on Instagram requesting it, I will give you a phone number, not my personal phone number, of course, but I will give you a Google Voice number that you can call. I will not answer. You can leave a message, and then I can use that recording on the show. So you might hear yourself on the show, which hopefully sounds exciting to at least, a handful of you. So I will post that number, like I said, on the Spookaroos group, a nice closed group of True Blue Spookaroos on Facebook. And I will also send it to you if you request it on Instagram. But you have to request it. I'm not just putting it out there for anybody in the world to call. I know some of you might end up doing that. I don't think you will. You guys, Spookaroos are cool. So, respect. Like I said, it's not my private number anyway, but who knows how these hackers work and how things can get passed around. So I do want to be, a little bit careful. So that's why I don't want to just toss the number out there or say it here on the show. I want you to have to work for it a little bit, and that'll show me that it's something that you really want, and that's how you'll get it. So I haven't posted it in the Spookaroos yet. I'm going to wait till we're a little bit closer to the actual episode number, and since we do remix episodes in between, and once in a while I randomly take a week off here or there, it's still going to be a little while. But so hopefully you will choose to be a part of that. And don't forget, you can go to the show's website, spookyas.com, and find links to all of these social media things, including our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/spookytimes with Eric D, all one word. And you can also find the Spookaroos group there, which is where you want to join to get that phone number. And you can find us on Instagram at spookyassshit. And yeah, that's that. So the other thing you can do, of course, to help celebrate getting near 200 episodes is write a nice review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to this program. Most podcast streaming services allow you to leave reviews, either, a certain number of stars or whatever, or, worded reviews, which always encourages me, makes me very happy to see, happy to know that you guys are listening. Of course, you can always reach out to me through the Facebook group, through Instagram, through good old-fashioned email, spookyasshit@gmail.com. And I love to hear from you guys that way too. I'm very responsive, so don't be afraid to reach out and say what's up, because I will definitely write back. Also, I haven't mentioned this in a long time, but on the show's website, you can pick up some merch. You can get a True Blue Spookaroo t-shirt or a tote bag. That stuff is sold through, one of those online deals. Is it TeePublic? I think it's TeePublic. It's been so long. I get like $1 every time you buy something, so it's not really for me, but I'm always happy and proud to see you guys wearing your shirts and rocking the gear. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go there and do that. And of course, another big thing you could do is share the show. We want to grow the Spookaroos, and I'm sure that you know some people like yourself who would be interested in spooky things. Sometimes we talk about serious things like murder, and sometimes we talk about silly things like my next new episode is going to be about. I can't tell you, I don't like to give my episode themes away ahead of time, but it's a silly one, the next one, and it's something that I teased all the way back in the promo of the original show, Spooky Ass Shit. So this is something that's been, almost 200 episodes coming, and I'm finally delivering on it on the next episode. So you'll definitely want to be here for that, especially if you like when we do the kind of light-hearted topics. We get a little silly here sometimes. It's not all serious. We like to have fun and games sometimes too. So please check that out on the next new episode. Of course, we'll do a remix episode next week, then another new episode after that. So until next time, don't be afraid.
Spooky Times is a Witchfinder production.